Welcome to Legends 2017, Adapting IPs for Attractions, What Works, What Doesn't. I'm Bob Rogers with BRC Imagination Arts, and today, on behalf of IAAPA, I am your moderator. We all want to thank our gold sponsor, Whitewater and Silver sponsor, and our silver sponsor, which is Craftwork Living Technology. So thanks to them and thanks to IAAPA, we are here. 2017 saw triumphs both past and present and great promises for the future. Harry Potter recently welcomed its 50 millionth writer. 50 million. This year, Pandora, World of Avatar, opened to rave reviews, and yesterday, the themed entertainment announcement, the TEA announced that Pandora would receive 2 Thea Awards. And we're all looking forward to the future with the announcement of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, which aims at achieving a square wave breakthrough in large-scale interactive experiences. And yet at the same time, there are attractions all around the world that are succeeding without using IPs from any movies. Disney's Animal Kingdom and Everest are 2 examples. They take their cues from the natural or supernatural worlds. Efteling's Symbolica creates its own fantastical magic. And Puy de Fou, inspired by the legends of French history, turns all of us momentarily into French patriots. But today, we're here to talk about IPs, mostly from movies. And what can we learn from the adaptation of Harry Potter, Avatar, or Star Wars for attractions that will help all of you launch and lead revolutionary ideas for the future? And that means both ways. What can we learn from their successes, but also from their challenges and surprises? Sitting here with me are 3 people who just may know something about this. Joe Rohde, Executive Designer and Vice President, Creative, Walt Disney Imagineering. You know, I've noticed that whenever I'm listening to Joe, my IQ goes up by about 30 points. Unfortunately, when I stop, it goes right back down, so I've learned to keep a pen and some paper to jot down what he says. Joe is the lead designer for Disney's Pandora, World of Avatar, also for Animal Kingdom, Expedition Everest, and the Aulani Resort in Hawaii, to name just a couple. Next to him, Thierry Coup, the Senior Vice President of the Creative Studio at Universal Creative. Terry leads the creative development of upcoming attractions for Universal parks and resorts globally, and he's played an integral role there for more than 20 years. Terry is probably best known for his work on attractions like Spiderman, Transformers, King Kong, and Harry Potter. And Scott Trowbridge. Scott is the Portfolio Creative Executive at Walt Disney Imagineering, and he's WDI's creative lead for all things Star Wars, including the design and development of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, a new 14-acre land going into both Disneyland in California and also Disney's California studios, or Hollywood studios here in Florida. Before this, Scott led WDI Research and Development, and before that, their Blue Sky Design Studio, and prior to joining Disney, Scott worked as Vice President for the Creative Division of Universal, where he worked alongside Terry on things like Spider-Man and helped create some of the very earliest concepts for Potter and a lot more. This year, we have left the 4th chair empty in honor of the incomparable Marty Sklar. He was part of Disney for over 50 years. For over a quarter century, Marty was the creative leader of Walt Disney Imagineering. And most important to all of us and all of you, Marty became the sorcerer's apprentice, channeling, articulating, and teaching Walt's philosophies to not 1, but to 2 or 3 generations of successive designers, and not just to people in Disney. With his appearances here on this legend panel for every year for almost 18 years, and through his books, which by the way are available right over there, he was and he continues to be a generous mentor to me, to you, to his counterparts at Universal, and to everyone, a mentor to Imagineers like you everywhere.
know, I've become known around here as the blank piece of paper advocate, and long ago I decided that my job was...
And by the way, that video comes to us with permission from Bob Weiss, who's head of Imagineering, and also from Marty's wife, Leah. She gave her permission. And although no one at WDI ever does anything by themselves, it's always a team effort, the person I'm told was in charge of creating that video was Mike Iwerks, that's the grandson of Iwerks, and the nephew of Don. So thank you, Don, Leah, Mike, and all of Imagineering, and especially thank you, Marty. Now, immediately following this panel, our panelists have agreed to stick around for a little while to sign some books or whatever you want. If you just want to briefly say hello, that's okay too. You don't have to buy a book, but if you want to get one, right back there, you can get one, and we'd love to sign it for you. So go get one right now while the line is short. We don't care if you get up in the middle of our presentation and buy a book, because that just means good things are being circulated. Also, available for autographs for the first time ever, Joe Rohde has with him the very first edition of his essential reading list, which if you get in line and tolerate the line and come by and say hello to all of us, he just might sign one of these. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our 2017 Legends panel. Our objective in this Legends panel is to capture and share fresh leadership wisdom from our panelists in a way that helps you, the leaders of tomorrow, as you shape the future. What can all of us learn from the world-class work and the world-class observations and thinking of Universal and Disney? Ideas that you can put to work next week, next month, or maybe even later this afternoon. So let's get started. Gentlemen, question mark. A feature film is customarily 120 or more minutes long. A theme park attraction is almost always 8 minutes or less. How do you distill the essence of a film IP into a time frame it was never designed to tolerate?
I'm not sure that we do that. I'm not sure that that's actually what we intend to do.
You've got a microphone up. Is there a switch? Are there switches?
There are switches and they're not turned on.
Check one. I'm going to beatbox now, if that's cool. That would not be cool. I'm not sure that's actually what we intend to do, is to distill a movie into 8 minutes or more. I think when when we think about using IP or intellectual property, hopefully it's not about just taking a creative work that was designed for one medium and then trying to shoehorn it into another medium. I think a successful use of IP, not just how I think about it, but I think a good way to think about it, is to take what is the essence of what made that story or creative work successful, understand the DNA of that creative work, and then find the best possible way to express that DNA through another creative medium, and not to try to replicate, do a poor job of replicating a creative work from one medium into another.
I tend to agree. I think a film is a way of exploring a story world. We're really building story worlds, not necessarily linear story plots. So a film is a format that allows you to explore the character-based side of a storytelling world, because you follow characters through a plot. It takes an hour and something to do. The stuff we do is much more about direct experience. It's about you, what's going to happen to you, and what could happen to you inside of this story world where these things happened to those characters. So even the focus of what it's about is really somewhat different, right? The characters aren't,
There's a different star.
Yeah, you can't, there's a different star. You really are meant to be the protagonist.
You once, Joe, described that as being, you said a film is a third-person narrative, whereas a theme park is a first-person narrative. Before we go to Terry for the same earlier question, would you just talk about that a little bit? I thought that was...
Yeah, I think that's the very point. I mean, when you go into a theater, either live theater or a film, you're rendered pretty much inert. You sit in the dark, in the quiet, you watch something happen to somebody else. And, you know, we're trained, our bodies and our minds are trained to project our emotions into the life of this person and the things that are happening to them on a screen, and a lot of our emotional attachment to the story, it comes from the things that happen to this person. But it does take time. It's not well done in 2 minutes. It's not well done in 5 minutes. It's well done in an hour and a half, and in some cases in live theater even longer. So that's a third-person narrative. I'm sitting here, that's happening to them. I'm very moved, I'm very excited by what's happening, but it's happening to them because I'm sitting here with popcorn. Now I go into a park. I'm up on my feet, my body is either moving through space under my own volition or it's moving through space in a vehicle. I'm anything but inert, right? I don't have the spare mental framework to pay attention to what's happening to some other person. I'm paying attention to what's happening to me. So that whole meaning has to turn upside down now, and you have to figure out, well, what is it, as Scott said, what is it about this world that could ever be meaningful to a person who is experiencing it directly as something happening to them?
But still with popcorn.
With popcorn.
Terry?
Well, I see the adaptation of films and books as well as being almost like, for film, it's almost like taking the director's cut. And now you're placing yourself, you're placing the guest into a familiar environment, familiar stories and characters, but there's a whole bunch of things that were edited and ended up on the floor, and now you're bringing them to life, and you allow the guest to enter a world they seem to know and they react to, they're emotionally connected to, but then they're discovering new places within that world, and they are the stars of that. So that's the way I see it. And the same with books. When you adapted the Harry Potter stories, it's almost like we've added a few pages there, where you've read the books 20 times, but as you think you know this chapter, all of a sudden you're discovering new things, and you start owning that. You start owning it, and you become part of it.
2 years ago on this panel, Tom Merman, who was then CEO of Ocean Park and is now in charge of Universal Studios Beijing, he advised all of us, innovate beyond your customer's imagination. Innovate beyond your customer's imagination. That's great advice. How in the hell do you live up to that? It's the special effects that people have been seeing on the movie screen. And more important, how do you go beyond that customer expectation?
That's the fun part.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the great thing about the rise of technology, and we've all seen it, and you know, through better imagery and now real-time imagery, or you know, VR, whatever. That march of technology has, especially the technology in people's daily lives. So what you can do on your phone, what you can do at home, the quality of those experiences has continued to grow and grow and grow. The fidelity of those experiences, the engagement with those experiences, because they can be interactive, has grown and grown and grown. All of that just raises the bar for what we have to do when we're not asking you to spend 10 minutes on your couch or 10 minutes staring at your phone, but we're asking you to bring your family to one of our locations. What we have to deliver to our guests day in, day out has to be so much more compelling and so much more amazing that it's worth that journey. That it is every day, that's our, it's not just an obligation, it's also our most amazing opportunity. And I think, you know, one of my favorite quotes is, you know, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I live by that almost every day, and finding ways to take technology or to abuse or misuse technology for an experiential or an emotional end, that's what gets me up in the morning. That's the fun part.
I think everyone's expectations have gone so much higher, so much more sophisticated. We have to deliver experiences that are much more immersive than anything you can find out there. I mean, you can have a VR headset at home, you can play with AR, but there's nothing like entering an entire world where you have been transported completely, and it's not just igniting the basic senses, you know, the sights and physical, the touch, but it's also the sense. You know, like you walk into the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, you can smell the sense coming from the restaurant that feels very much like what was described in the books, by J.K. Rowling. She did such a great job of describing every bit of the senses and the taste of the butterbeer. And when you finally taste it, it's like an ecosystem of, engaging all the senses and placing you in an environment, in a world where you can't find it anywhere else but into a theme park that is well.
But I do think this ecosystem, I'm personally not as invested in the space race of effects. I think world building starts at really primal levels of attraction. Is it beautiful? Does it offer me places I can see where I belong? Is it complex enough to maintain my attention for a long period of time? Does it hold surprises? A lot of Avatar, the land, for example, it's just the same. It's rock work, it's planting, it's lighting, and while there is some technical advancement, it's not. I go back to thinking we're working at a completely different medium. Our medium is direct experience. Our medium is human experience that is real and direct and physical. So I don't feel like I need to chase a filmic illusion before I have satisfied the fundamental, primal, and for the most part rather ancient requirements of a built physical space. It needs to be beguiling first as a built thing, and then you can layer up on top of that. The challenge always with technical effects is their half-life. How long before people figure out, oh, that's that one like they did at that other place, or oh, that doesn't fool me anymore. Whereas color and form, composition, it's not exactly fooling you, it's something else going on.
And I totally agree with Joe, and I think what we've seen with just Diagon Alley, you don't have to go into a high-tech ride, you just walk into Diagon Alley, and that is a surprise. No one expects what you see when, and you can just watch our guests' faces. You see them, their jaw dropping, you see them tear up, and you see them get on their knees and start kissing the ground. They can't believe it. They've arrived.
Look, I apologize for that. I did it one time. It was one time.
I've seen it. It's stunning, but you've done that without the high tech, at all. It's just it's a basic, theatrical design, but it's so enveloping. It's so rich with details and with layers of storytelling. That tells a story. You don't have to really get anywhere else.
I think that's right.
I think that I would just say to kind of sum all this up, because I think all of this goes back to one of the very first things we said, which is that all of this has to be in the service of telling the purest form of the story that you're trying to tell, right? Whether in technology and whiz-bang, kind of tricks won't and can't substitute for a really strong story that at its core is a true story, something that engages you emotionally. Because any fad will not overcome a weak story.
Okay. Every IP comes with an owner, and IP owners come in a range of rationalities from 10 to 0. What are the ideal ways of working with owners? What are some signals that there might be difficulties ahead? What are the signals of red flags that you're in deep shit? And how do you get it back on track?
So my experience with the various intellectual properties over the years, but Avatar is a really good case in point, was to initiate the discussion with Lightstorm Entertainment, which is James Cameron and John Landau, on the basis of underlying value system and underlying theme, not on the basis of superficial detailed manifestation, but let's talk about what this story is really about. The value system, the reverence for a world of nature, the dangers of turning your back on the systems of nature, the power of nature to overcome human agency when it is set up in opposition. These underlying ideas, right? We're going to start there. And from there, we will discuss what aspects of a film, which is a love story and a war story, neither of which are relevant to our job, right? So what else is in this film that is relevant to what we're going to do for a first-person experience that touches upon these values, rather than, and this is where I think you can run into trouble. So I had people who were very interested in this value set. James Cameron is very sincere about the underlying value set of this property and very willing to discuss additional new novel ways of expressing the value set, right? So it's easy. Where it becomes difficult is when a creator has not done introspective work to understand for themselves the underlying value, and so they're fixated on the detail manifestation, and becomes this long discussion about some doorknob because it was in the movie, instead of a deeper discussion about what are we trying to accomplish. That can be more difficult. But usually, when you get to this level of accomplishment, when you get to this level of storytelling, you're a master storyteller and you know how story works and you know how to talk about it.
It's an interesting, I'm having a hard time actually, I understand the question, but I have a hard time sometimes trying to figure out who owns IP. You know, a lot of the content that was in the Marty tribute video was around Disneyland, understandably. When I think about, you know, who owns Disneyland, I actually don't think of it as the Walt Disney Company's as an owner of Disneyland. It's owned by that audience, right? I mean, we are stewards of that park. It is owned by the people who, for generations, have gone there with their families and shared memories, and you know, and had significant memories forged in that place. They own that park. We're just the stewards of it. And when I think about IP ownership, I guess because I do understand the question, there's two ways I think that you can approach an IP owner. One is, and the way that Joe is describing, is as a collaborator, and the other way is as a licensee. If you approach the IP owner as a collaborator, we're going to extend these stories. We're going to extend an audience's relationship with this world, or perhaps even extend, you know, a relationship with individual characters. You're really collaborating with that core creator to extend that universe. If you're talking to somebody who is purely just an IP owner who is licensing IP to you and not truly collaborating with you on improving the IP, or just leveraging it, mortgaging it, then you are bound to have that doorknob discussion, because that person or group is probably not able to have the kind of conversation around, let's expand this universe. They're really only able to interpret scripture, not write new scripture.
I think that's spot on. Licensing is entirely predicated on a kind of contract with the existing thing as it sits there, rather than creative extension of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for my point of view is more the collaboration, the partnership. It's almost like marrying someone for their wonderful child. You know, you have to get along. You're gonna have to develop this relationship. But the goal is to ensure that this child is gonna grow, flourish, be successful, and because we both benefit from it. That comes with a lot of complexities, obviously. A set of expectations from the IP partner. But
Sure, articulate. You've been talking all around this problem of the difference between dealing with the original creator versus dealing with a messenger. I was once working on a Star Trek attraction, and one of the people said, "If it's not on TV or in the films, it's not real." Think about that. Is that kind of what happens when you're dealing with a messenger?
Well, I think when you're dealing with people who don't have the power to negotiate decisions, all they can do is represent
The doorknob.
a doorknob, right? Usually, though, somewhere up that tree is somebody capable of making decisions. I don't, like in the case of Avatar, there is virtually nothing. I would be hard pressed to come up with an object or character or form that you saw in the movie. nothing I can think of is copied from that film. Not a rock, not a plant. The particular Na'vi characters that you meet are not from the film. The buildings, the shapes of them, not really from the film. And yet, it's exceedingly compelling and convincing evocation of the world of the film if you accept it as a world, right? Instead of as a film. Just like, look, we have a land called Africa. There was a movie called Out of Africa. It was shot in Africa. When I go to Africa, I don't expect to see Meryl Streep because I understand that Africa is a place where you could go make a movie, right? In the same sense, Pandora is a place where you could go make a movie. This is not where that movie was made. This is another place on Pandora where these things are happening. Which is world building. That's how you're creating a world. It's in the vested interest of the owner because the world gets bigger. That increases their own storytelling opportunity. And indeed, this is what we experienced, right? But you're pushing the world out instead of just making a three-dimensional kind of postcard of the thing from the movie. The famous, oh, that was a great moment when so-and-so grabbed the thing and then he jumped on the other thing and wasn't that great? You know, it's great because of 45 minutes of exposition that came before it, you know, in a film.
Well, that's when you're being reminded about another creative work, right? That's when that is, it becomes referential creative work. I don't have a good example for the Star Wars stuff because that's all original storytelling, but I do have a good Potter example. Back in the early days, in the design of Potter, there was this place where it was perfect to have a fountain in the land. And at that time, there were people who were responsible for kind of like, you know, maintaining the integrity, blah, blah, blah. And it was that wasn't in the book, right? There was no reference to this fountain in the book, therefore it could not exist. It's like, well, but it could exist. I mean, this could be right around the corner because it kind of feels like there should be a fountain right here. Well, yeah, but it doesn't exist in the book, so that can't, you know, we have no reference for that. It's not in the scripture. That's the kind of conversation you have with the people who are in charge of maintaining integrity. As soon as you have a conversation with folks like J.K. Rowling or Stuart Craig, the production designer who created the look and feel for the movies and inspired the land that Thierry did, you know, as soon as you have a conversation with them, they're like, oh yeah, a fountain would be perfect. That is exactly what should have been here, right? But until you get to the right people to have that conversation, you're just having it's not in the book, it's not in the movie, it's not on the TV show, so it's not real.
Yeah,
Now, Terry, your experience has been kind of very different because we all laughed and cried and kissed the ground when we went to Diagon Alley, but that was, you were bringing the literal place as literally as you could. You were trying to bring something literal to life, or am I missing something?
Well, the set of expectations for the Harry Potter fans was different than Avatar because there was so much detail, so much depth of storytelling again in the books. 7 books, 8 movies. The visuals were so specific and so wonderful and magical, and I think everyone who's read the books and seen the movies is already pre-wired to kind of dream about those places and dream about going there, and always thinks, well, I'm never going to get there, but I'm going to watch the movie again. And so we had to bring that to life. But when you really compare the two, you know, there are some specific moments and places and windows and doors and signage that are identical, but a lot of it is also new, and it was created from, you know, the original creators. We worked with the filmmakers, Stuart Craig, Warner Brothers, and everyone contributed to the creation in taking the essence of what was in those movies, in those visuals, in those stories. And then we you know, when you step through the entrance of Diagon Alley, you get that first image, and you've arrived. Your brain was pre-wired to get these sensations, these emotions, and feel like, oh, I've seen this place, I've dreamed about it, I've read about it, and I'm here. And then you make 2 steps, and you start seeing a place that you haven't heard about, you haven't seen. It's the rest of it that expands that world, that gives you more to discover, layers and layers that were not described anywhere in the books. But you know, it's that when you're allowed to have some creative license and working with the original creators of that, that's when you can create a place that isn't like what you've ever dreamed of. You know, it's beyond that.
There are 2 reasons I think you have to be really careful of this, and one of them is you have to surprise people. People are prone to ignore what they expect. You know, I mean, you get a very, very short burn on expectation. Whereas if you can surprise people and show them something they didn't expect, which is either qualitative in terms of execution, like Diagon Alley is exemplary, right? Or it is, I didn't know that would be there. The camera looked here, it never looked over there. Somehow you have to surprise them. And then the other thing I think you have to be really careful of is I'm just not sure statistically, even with something like Harry Potter or Star Wars, that you can build a land. Think of the time and the money and the long tail of amortization on this predicated on fans. Just don't think you can do that. I think you have to build for everyone. And the fans will be pleased to see what you have done, but I don't believe in the world there are enough fans of anything that you could build a land based on fans.
There are enough Harry Potter fans, I think. But, you know, it's true, Joe, and what we've seen as well is that, believe it or not, some people haven't read the books, right? The Harry Potter books. And I've run into people that say, you know, I've never read the books, I was against it. I came here with my grandchildren, with my children. Now that I'm here, I really want to read the books.
Mm-hmm.
This is incredible.
Yeah, we get the same thing with
right.
Avatar.
So
I didn't see the movie, it was a long time ago, blah, blah,
so
blah,
you know
but now I want to go watch
you've
it.
done that.
That's right. Yeah, but I think that is the job. That is the job.
There's even a few people who haven't seen Star Wars movies. It's like 12.
What I'm hearing is that along the way there is a relationship developed with the IP owner, and that to a certain extent it's got to be transactional. You can get approval for this, and then you move on and you build on that. Have any of you, by any chance, gone way, way down the wrong road and had to suddenly wake up and go, uh-oh, we are come to a bad place, and we now need to go back to the IP owner and to our own bosses and say, we'd really like to rescind all of our previous approvals and go back a ways and start over. What was the circumstance? What can all of us learn from your unfortunate experience and your brilliant recovery, I presume?
Well, we had a few challenges, of course. You know, it's one of them I can recall is with the Gringotts attraction. You know, we were as good partners as we could be, and we all marched down the road of doing a concept and then the schematic phase, doing a whole previs for the Gringotts ride, and trying to get everything approved to be on schedule. And we kind of lost track of what made an attraction really great. And to be true to the books as much as possible, because that was our top priority, and then the film second. We ended up with an attraction that didn't deliver on the essence of Harry Potter. And there could not be a conflict between Harry Potter and Voldemort in Gringotts Bank. It just wasn't in the books. So we had to really look at this seriously and say, well, we have to create this. We have to go back to the author and tell her that maybe there are a couple of pages that fell out of the book. and we're in the same place, we're at the same time. The snapshot, you know, we're right there in this time frame, but we're seeing it from a different camera angle. We're here, we're seeing something that wasn't described in the books, and that expands on this, that makes the story richer and deeper, and it's going to make the ride that much greater. We need to have the conflict, we need to have the resolution, we need to have this preemption, the preempting of the whole thing. And so we had to go back after we had all the approvals. We had to go back and unwind and revise the entire story, the script, and we did all that in a few weeks. And we finally got an audience with the author, and she totally agreed. She said, absolutely. And she got us the approval when everybody thought, no, we're never going to get this approved because it's not in the book. So it was a road bump, and it turned out to be great at the end. But you know, it's so there were a few small ones like that as well. But, you know, it's just you learn a lot from that.
I don't really have an example, I think, where a personal example, but what I have seen happen is when you're partnering with an IP owner, a licensor of some IP, who doesn't really understand our business. So the expectations are unreasonable when you apply it to something that's going to be, you know, in use day in, day out, you know, in the real world, not happening on a screen someplace, but it's something that's happening day in, day out. I've definitely seen examples of that, more as an audience member than as somebody who's created these things. But I see this as, you know, because I'm also a fan of what we all do. So going to see, you know, going places and seeing examples of experiences that were maybe less than successful, and talking to the people who, you know, were involved in it. And a lot of times it is about because there were unrealistic expectations or misplaced expectations from those folks that own and licensed the intellectual property. They wanted it to be more like what they knew. They wanted it to be more like a game. They wanted it to be more like a movie or a book or whatever, and less like an experience that happens in a real place with real people.
I have another quick example. When we worked with Peter Jackson to create the King Kong attraction, you know, we told Peter we want to do this great, fully immersive King Kong experience, but it has to be 90 seconds. 90 seconds to, you know, to go to Skull Island and to encounter Kong and dinosaurs, and 90 seconds. You know, he came back and he had a 20-minute previs. I said, well, that can't work because the studio tour has this 90-second cycle, and we're going to lose a lot of capacity, and there's a whole... So, you know, we went back and forth quite a bit, and he finally came down to 12 minutes, and that's not good enough. And then 3 minutes, and that was it. He just couldn't cut any shorter than that. It was 3 minutes, and it still didn't work for us. So it took a lot of collaboration, educating about how do we create this unique experience, this condensed experience in less time, and it resulted in a fantastic 90-second experience. But it was very challenging for someone who's used to telling a story with more time, with using different tools, you know, different camera angles and close-ups, and you know, couldn't do that. Yeah, it all goes away. So it turned out well, but it's, you know, it's one of those educations.
And I do think this is often where you run into this. If you're unfamiliar with a form, you're trying to cram too much stuff into it. And if your expertise comes from character-based, plot-based, expository storytelling, you're trying to do a really short version of that. And just think, I mean, you wouldn't pay money to go into the theater to watch a 4-minute, you know, Avatar movie. How good could it possibly be compared to the form as it's properly exposited, which must therefore mean a linear arc, character-based expository story that's going to have revelation within the middle of it. Probably not a thing you want to try to do on a 90-second, 2-minute, 3-minute experience. You need something else. And there's very little language, you know, the unfamiliarity with being able to dispense with the close-up. When we were doing Guardians of the Galaxy, we went around and around and around on the size of little baby Groot. Because baby Groot in the movie is really, really, really small. He's quite small indeed, like that, right? Well, that's all fine and good when you can cut away to a close-up to get a reaction shot on baby Groot. But in the ride, baby Groot is supposed to be there, not in a movie. He's supposed to be there, and he's about 20 feet away. So at 20 feet away, I can't really tell what a chipmunk is thinking. I mean, I can't tell, right? I can't read body movements. I can't read the cues. So you're going to have to make baby Groot bigger. You're going to have to. So then that becomes a series of demonstrations in scale, in space, with animation to try to figure out, well, how much bigger? Because pretty soon it's not baby anymore. Now what it is, it's like miniature Groot. That's not right. It can't be miniature Groot. It has to be baby Groot. How big can baby Groot be? Same thing with Rocket, the raccoon character, right? We're going to build a rocket robot. The necessity of the robot is the stuff that goes inside the robot has to fit inside the robot. So how big the raccoon is going to be based on how small we can make robot stuff. Because I know he's really this tall, never happened. Never going to happen. So make your piece. We're going to have to go look how small can he be, only this small. So if you really, 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 really were like a fan, you know, you'd be like, oh, that's great, but you know, Groot's way too big, and Rocket's big too, and he's not. You just this is the form, what it does. And if you fight it, you're going to end up actually creating a substandard kind of product because you're chasing the wrong aesthetic. You're chasing another art form instead of this one, what this does.
What's interesting is, I mean, you create a formulated ride experience, but if you've done your job right, when the guests get off the ride, they have no idea how long it's
That's
been.
right. They don't.
You feel like, was that
That's right.
20 minutes, a half hour? It's, you know, you've achieved.
We had operators get off the Guardians of the Galaxy remodel ride. The operators. And they're like, well, that's all well and good, but now how are we going to get our capacity numbers? You made this ride like 3 times longer. But we absolutely certainly did not. Because we're not stupid. It's the same ride. It's the same length of ride. How could it not be? You know, we all know the business we're in, but it just felt like a much longer experience, even to professional people who assess such things. And that, I think, is the power of dedicating yourself to the art forms that we have and executing them at their highest level of capacity instead of chasing somebody else's business. It's another business, you want to go work in it, it's there, go work in that business.
You know, when we think about the way we do Star Wars, we have this amazing group of creative people that collaborate together, and this is truly a collaborative form. And we have lots of conversations around what are the Star Wars stories that are best told through film. What are the kinds of Star Wars stories that are best told in animation or in TV? What are the kind of Star Wars stories do we tell in books and in games? And what kind of Star Wars stories do we best tell through the medium of what we do in the parks, which is this first-person, experiential, I'm the protagonist, I can make choices, those choices should have consequences kind of experience, and really look at parsing out, not chasing a creative work from another art form, but actually expanding, and Star Wars happens to be a universe of stories and characters that is rich enough that you can do this and kind of think about what is the best possible theme park experience version of Star Wars, and what does that story look like? What characters are a part of that? What characters are my sidekicks? You know, what are the places I go? That's kind of the freedom I think we get to have and need to have to take these IPs and bring them to life in the best possible way, that at the end of the day, even if we have an IP owner or licensor or a partner that is, you know, reluctant, with those challenges that happen along the way, we're not in this to do a bad job of representing that IP. We're in this to do a really great job of extending those stories so that our audiences, our shared audiences, the original audiences for that IP and our parks audiences, all come together and feel like they've had an amazing, satisfying, best possible experience, and no one's going away saying, you know, that baby Groot was about 6 inches too tall. Because if we do our job right, nobody cares, right? It's just the best version of that experience.
So choosing IP then becomes a thing, because a profoundly character-based intellectual property that focuses almost exclusively on the events that happen to a set of individuals and doesn't really have placemaking and doesn't really have a physical plant is just simply probably not even worth pursuing, because where can you go with it? I mean, you're locked to plots about characters and things that happened to them, and it's very difficult then to create something immediate that can happen. And I just really think every morning that people walk into one of these places, you have to assume that, I don't know, half the people, this is their initial experience. I actually will tell my teams not to use the names of the characters, not to use the names of the places. It's not helpful. It's like, tell me how I know that guy with the big white hair is a bad guy. I have 11 seconds to figure out that the guy with the big white hair is bad and I'm not supposed to like him. How do I know the handsome guy is the boss? I have 7 seconds to establish that the handsome guy is the boss and he's got a thing with the blue girl, but the blue girl is not related to the blue guy. right? Tell me how I know these things, because this is my chance to know them. Tell me how I know this is an alien world. Tell me how I know that it has a past history of violence. Tell me how I know that it is safe to be here. Tell me how I know that the giant blue lady is not going to eat me. How do I know the giant blue lady is friendly? Tell me. Don't use the word Navi. Don't use the word avatar. I don't want to hear these words. You tell me what I see with your eyeballs, how I feel emotionally about what I see, what I might possibly ever deduce from what I see, and how that makes me expect the next thing that's supposed to happen. You have to do it like that, or you're not really telling a story, you're just referring to a story.
But Joe, one thing I think it's fair to point out that there's a whole other world in which IP is used less as a way, a forum in which to extend and tell story, but it's used more as a logo or a marketing ploy or some other differentiator that is trying to leverage whatever value that brand or name or character has and apply it to this unrelated thing. Right?
I totally believe that intellectual property has great value as a marketing asset, absolutely. I just think that it's much less, if you're doing your design properly and starting the story at zero.
When you slap it on the front car of a roller coaster, we're talking about the growing divide in IPs between haves and have-nots. That the larger, better financed companies seem to be ending up with all the most powerful IPs, and that most of the rest of us have to make do with less. And yet, a good many parks find very, very powerful IPs, and they get them for free by looking in the culture that surrounds them rather than in a movie theater. Some examples of these are Ocean Park, which was under Tom Merman, was in competition with the IP arsenal at the disposal of Hong Kong Disney. And yet it thrived and beat Hong Kong Disney for a whole bunch of years before eventually, I think just in this last year, being slightly surpassed by Hong Kong. Puy de Fou is another one. Efteling is another one. They pull these things out of their local culture or their zeitgeist. Europa Park is another one that's really, really good at this. A lot of the principles that you're talking about here apply whether you're using a famous IP or something that's locally grown or you're creating for yourself. But specifically those projects, you're familiar with them: Ocean Park, Puy de Fou, Efteling, Europa Park, or any other comparable that you might want to draw up. What have you learned by studying what they do? And what can we all learn from those parks and the way that they create and manage IP?
I'm going to ask a question. I guess the first thing I'd say is because I don't necessarily think of what the examples you gave. I don't really necessarily think of that as IP in the way I think we're talking about it. Those are archetypes, right? Those are classic stories that are archetypes that allow us to come to that experience. Because as we've said, these are a lot of these things. We don't expect you to take 2 hours to read the backstory. We want you to come in. We want you to have a fairly quick experience and kind of feel like you're immediately able to kind of invest yourself into it, right? We don't need you to kind of be spending the time trying to figure out what's going on. And therefore, we rely on every storyteller relies on archetypes and models and forms of narrative. We rely on a grammar of experience that is somewhat specific to our art form, but every art form has these archetypes and models of experience, and there are just some fundamental, just innate human archetypes and forms of experience. I don't think of that as IP. I think of that as just the way we're wired. And regardless of whether we're telling a story that is, has its roots in classic, Greek mythology, or whether we're telling a story that is coming right out of the Cineplex today, all of those rely on the same basic forms of, I believe, of narrative and storytelling. So I think that the differentiator is how well it's done, right? And there are great examples of really, really well done, amazing, charming, wonderful stories that pull you and immerse you into a situation and allow you to kind of express empathy and at all those parks you just named. In addition to hopefully every park that is out there has great examples of those kinds of successes. But I don't think it's about IP or non-IP. I think it's just about, is it a story well told?
But it does raise this odd language thing that when we say IP, we somehow mean somebody else's intellect.
Two things that I think are very important. One is from the operator specific. I'm trying to kind of put my head into this, into what I think this audience cares about. One is why have an IP, right? Because if you're licensing it, you're paying money for it. Why have it? Are you doing it because you think it's an easy? Does it make marketing this thing easier? Does it attract a different audience or an expanded audience that you're hoping to attract? But there has to be a why. Like, why is this IP going to make this a better experience? Why is this IP going to make this a better roller coaster or a better hamburger? If the answer is I don't really know, then save the money, right? Save that money and put that into excellent design to make that the best possible version of that coaster, the best possible version of that hamburger. If you can articulate that reason, then you can go to that IP holder and say, this is why we want to use IP, and this is why we want to use this IP, and this is what we think. The second thing you said was, what are the audience's expectations, right? If you just slap that logo on your new coaster, is that going to meet your audience's expectations? Especially if you launch some big billboard campaign about come see the new Hulk burger, and if you don't deliver against those expectations, you're going to have an unhappy IP partner, and you're going to have an unhappy shared audience. You have to kind of figure out why you want to use that IP, what is the audience's expectation from that, and are we delivering against it? Or do something else. Or find a different IP that does fit better.
It's a good segue from what Terry was talking about a moment ago with Waterworld. There are also these older and less popular IPs that have been around for a long time, but they still make extremely popular attractions. Waterworld was a bomb in North America, but did actually pretty well, I'm told, overseas. But nevertheless, it's long ago and almost nobody remembers it. Last time I took the Universal Studios backlot tour in Los Angeles, I was with a tram load of Korean speakers who spoke no English. I can't imagine what they thought of the Psycho houses we went by. There's something they've no idea what they're looking at. But there's also, you've got attractions based on King Kong and Frankenstein. And although there have been some remakes, those date from like 1933. And as I recall, the Mickey Mouse hasn't made a great movie since about 1941. And yet these things make great IPs, a great story or a great archetypes, whatever you want to call them. By the way, that distinction is important because you guys can buy Harry Potter and Avatar and Star Wars. Right. Most of the rest of us have a somewhat different situation. So talk about when a less popular or a somewhat antiquated property, I'll call it, can become great. What makes it?
Execution is the answer to all of these questions. If you think about, Snow White is an intellectual property from the Middle Ages. It's really, really old. Everybody knows how it ends. Everybody knows the story. There is no surprise value to the intellectual property Snow White. Why would anybody want to acquire this worn-out old medieval story from the 12th century in Hungary or wherever the hell it is? I think it's Hungary, originally. And we're going to make a movie out of that? The logic of this does not play out. The intellectual property itself possesses no quality that you do not bring to it through skillful execution. You have to execute skillfully or you have not harvested value. Therefore, the value must not lie in the label. It lies in the execution. Otherwise, it would always work. And it does not always work. It works when you execute it skillfully. Therefore, skillful execution trumps subject matter. And so you can pull your subject matter from all kinds of surprising places. Somebody has to decide right the moment before they create a movie that they're going to make a movie about something, right? And those, I mean, Pirates of the Caribbean, the whole movie franchise of Pirates of the Caribbean comes from pirates, which, yes, there was a ride, Pirates, but it's not like those movies are just the ride. They're about every idea we ever had about pirates, which goes back, you know, a few hundred years. People have been romanticizing pirates. So that vintage of the intellectual property I don't think is particularly relevant, nor do I think the widespread pre-understanding of the intellectual property particularly relevant. I mean, Game of Thrones, before the TV series Game of Thrones, is very, very popular with a statistically insignificant number of people. I mean, I don't mean that in a mean way even. It's just like, what an idea to take this story that this sort of category of people over here really like, we're going to turn it into a medium-defining exercise in storytelling that now is like a reference that people talk about when they want to talk about an entire storytelling medium. And yet, it's all about execution. There are like 3 other guys wearing funny clothes with swords, you know, long-form TV things that didn't take off.
I mean, in the case of the studio tour in Hollywood, you know, the big part of the studio tour, which is our most popular attraction, is based on the heritage of the studio, the history of the studio, and some of those older intellectual properties are the classics. They are the classics, and it's great to keep a balance of those classics with some of the newest high-tech, you know, attractions and intellectual properties. It delivers on that history. You may not know much about Psycho, or you may not know about Jaws, but we show you a clip of it, and we show you it was filmed here, or it was, you know, a lot of it was on the studio and the sound stages, and that all, I think it adds up to a whole experience that gives you a bit of the history, a bit of how we got to where we are now, and that's important.
I've got one here, especially for Scott, but the other two can chime in on it. Scott, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge promises higher levels of interactive participation than ever before. And according to rumor, you are working on some kind of multi-day full immersion adventure based on Star Wars, something like Sleep No More but a sleepover for 3 days, and all based on Star Wars, all putting you into that world. So now, we don't want to pressure you into revealing any secrets, but please spend a couple of moments telling us telling us whatever you can tell us about your plans, and along the way, we'd appreciate it if you would accidentally reveal some secrets.
Chewbacca is Rey's father. No, that's not true. That's not true. I think, you know, we've talked about this a lot as we've talked even today, and even previously as we talked about the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge project. This is all about changing the lens on who's the protagonist of this experience. As Joe said and Thierry said earlier, you know, when you go into some traditional theme park experiences, you're kind of invisible. Like, pick Pirates, right? You go and you ride Pirates of the Caribbean, and the pirates don't acknowledge you, they don't know you were there, they don't pay attention to you at all. Frankly, it's just rude. Well, they're pirates, I guess it's okay, they're pirates. But that isn't a way to engage you more directly into the story, is by having you be ignored and inconsequential to the story and what plays out. What we're trying to do with our park experiences in general, we're making a concerted effort with you know, new stuff that we're doing, especially Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, is to actually it would have been very easy for us to remind you about stories that you already remembered from Star Wars, say Luke's story and, you know, Tatooine, and of course it's a fan favorite, and so there is a certain level of audience expectation that I'm going to go get to, you know, see, you know, Luke on Tatooine, or, you know, that iconic, some of those iconic scenes from the first movie. But we all know those scenes, we all know Luke's story, and we know that we're not in that story. Right? We have no business being on that planet with Luke as some kind of weird voyeur. Instead, what we want to do is to create or extend this universe of amazing stories and lay out new stories introduce you to new stories, new characters, new places, but this time starring you, right? Giving you an opportunity to engage in these stories. Should you want to, right? There's no obligation to do this, but we do feel like there's a significant part of the audience that wants to feel more engaged and more connected to the stories they're experiencing. So we're trying to find ways to make that a possibility, to extend that invitation to folks in the parks. And it's actually, what you talked about as a more immersive experience is not a rumor. We actually announced that project this past summer, a multi-day immersive, story-driven experience. I would not characterize it as Sleep No More, which if those who are maybe not familiar with that, that's a great piece of site-specific theater that is been running for almost 9 years now, I think, in New York and now in Shanghai as well. That invites people to kind of like explore a theatrical work, but kind of walk throughout this building, kind of exploring scenes that are happening. In fact, it's specifically not, Sleep No More is a great creative work. It's a great experience. I've done it probably a dozen times. It is, by its very nature, we as an audience in that particular experience are intended to be invisible and voyeurs. We are specifically masked and invisible to the action that's happening. So I would not characterize it in that way, either in terms of our level of engagement, nor in the form of experience that we're contemplating. It's not, again, it's all more about there's an invitation to engage, there's an invitation to play, if you will. I'm not ready to talk about a lot of details on that project yet, so, but stay tuned. It's something we're excited about. I'm excited about.
Okay, he won't tell us anything about it, but you guys will, right?
Thierry will.
Who do you study? Who do you study and what do you study for ideas? Let's start with Thierry.
Well, I've been lucky enough to once a year attend the TED conference, which to me recharges my batteries in all different ways. Just maybe not the conference as much as it used to, but the discussions I have with some of the most creative minds after convention in the evenings or when we have breakout sessions. Some amazing discussion, talks on science and art and even politics. But it's just, that's probably the one that charges me up the most around the year. Otherwise, traveling and exploring different countries and worlds, and whether they're urban or they're completely in the middle of nowhere. To me, that really clears my mind and again, I think gets me ready for more creativity. And then the third thing is just watching our guests in our parks. Watching them enter Diagon Alley on Hogsmeade or experience our rides. That really, to me, that ignites my creativity more than anything else.
Scott?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that I pay attention to is our audience and what they're paying attention to. Right? I mean, they are our audience for this. This is an artistic medium. Parks do not exist without an audience. And so understanding what their expectations are, what their desires are, how we build these experiences. And I think this is somewhat unique to parks. At least the way we think, I'll just say the way I think about it, I think Joe shares this, but the way we think about parks is and I'm sure Thierry shares the same idea, we design these experiences to be shared. Right? These are not solitary experiences. They're not like going into a movie theater and sitting in a dark room and sitting parallel, and we all sit and stare parallel at a screen and don't talk. It's not going into the theater where we're expected to stay quiet or sitting in front of a fire reading a book. We build these experiences with the expectation that you're going to share them with people you care about, friends, family, in this kind of ad hoc community. So paying attention to that, paying attention to what those people want to get from each other. How do they actually want to take this experience and use it to build these memories they're having together, how to create these bonds between the members of the audience? Requires us to really understand what the audience is looking for, what they want out of this, and then kind of finding the ways to trick them into having those emotionally transformative experiences. So that's the number one thing that I think I would pay attention to, aside from just watching other great master storytellers, exercise their craft. And I think we're lucky enough, that we get to do that. We get to work alongside some of the best storytellers you can imagine, working in this medium and in other mediums. And I'll just speak for myself personally. I sit in awe of watching people, even these gentlemen to my right, watching them do their work, which to me is just like watching a master magician. I don't know how you came up with that. I don't know how that happened. That's amazing, right? I mean, the more I can be the dumbest guy in the room and just study all the amazing talent around me, the happier I am.
Joe.
I am predisposed to be very academic about this work. I do believe it is an art form. I believe that as an art form, it is connected to a traceable, describable pedigree of behavior that goes back hundreds of years and is studyable and that you can learn from, that it is a classical art form. I also believe that if you're going to call yourself a professional, sorry, but if you're going to call yourself a professional, your opinion does not make you a professional. No. What makes you a professional is your library, like a lawyer, like a doctor. When you make a decision by reference to other decisions that have been made by other professionals across time and history, solving the same problems we all solve, which are narrative problems of storytelling in space and design. And many of those problems have been addressed before in the design of cathedrals, in the design of masks from the 17th century, in the design of opera, in the design of religious institutions. So on the one hand, I am very interested in the long arc of history, that leads up to the present moment of design that we do today. So I study a lot of just classical design of place back to the Romans. Study, not just, oh, what a nice book, study. And then we live in a time when there is a Copernican revolution taking place in our own understanding of our brains and our evolution and who we are as a creature. And we do not need to dwell in mystery about what makes color work and why people like things that are round and what kind of space people might enjoy, because there are people doing work on this. There are people hooking people up to electrodes and walking them up and down the street and measuring their skin tension, surface reaction, and anxiety based on architectural form. That's a thing. You can read it, you can study it, and you can walk out of there and you can know, not guess, not feel, not have an opinion. You can know that the kinds of textures and surfaces that we create within these rich, detailed environments are superior. They are, because science says they are, not you say they are. So I think, on the one hand, the deep arc of historical learning, back in time, of great designers and their decision-making, and the immediate revelation in our time of the nature of the human brain and the human creature and how we really respond to phenomena for real, both through this mass data collection and the specific study of our brain, change this game in two ways to make it become, because it's very hard to negotiate from this idea of please give me untold fortunes of money to do something I think is a good idea. It's just not a very strong argument, So by establishing that it is an art form and that the art form has roots and that these roots are valid and they don't change, you're creating a different graph. You're not creating a 60-year graph. You're creating a 2,000-year graph. That changes the nature of discussions and arguments and negotiation. That graph looks really different. When you talk about oh look, there's a new invention of a thing, a little glasses thing you put on, it looks like this big instead of this big, because it's way out here at the edge of this graph. And that's the graph you want to work with, because that's the stuff that has real legs. So I ask people to read a lot. I expect people to read a lot. I expect people to understand if something works,
It doesn't work by magic. It works for reasons. Things work for reasons.
Here's your last question, guys. One of the great things about IAAPA and a forum like this Legends panel is that we all help each other. Underneath all of the competition, even underneath the famous rivalry between Universal and Disney, we are all brothers and sisters of in the craft. We gather at events like this to learn from each other, and privately, each of you have expressed great respect and admiration for the other. I would like to ask you, in front of the group here, what is the most valuable insight that Disney can learn from Universal? And what is the most valuable insight that Universal can learn from Disney?
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, look, it's very clear there is a kind of remarkable speed to market. You know, stuff gets done at Universal. It gets done. And when you look at it from afar, this is one of the first things I think that you notice. Damn, that got done fast. That got done. And that speed to market is not just an economic thing. There is something about freshness and immediacy and problem solving that's really worth meditating on, that is part of speed to market, that isn't just, oh, it's going to save us some soft costs because we cut some time off a schedule. It also freshens decision making.
This is really hard for me. I've been in leadership. I've been lucky enough to be in leadership positions in both companies. So I kind of, what do I hate and love about myself? I don't know. I mean, I was actually going to suggest the same thing that Joe said, is that there's, there is a, Disney is a very large organization. It is a multinational conglomerate with, we have, parks all over the world. A cruise line, an adventure tourism business, other new forms of location-based entertainment that are soon to be announced and available to people. And so it is there are benefits and there are challenges that come with a large company, and the kind of large company decision-making. Speed is not always one of them, right? We can be deliberative about making large decisions sometimes, and that is absolutely 100% true. There's good things that come with that too, though. There is a sense of the ability to kind of almost not see a challenge that can't be accomplished. By tapping into the talent base that's inside the Walt Disney Company. We have the best storytellers, we have the best technologists, we have the best basic research labs. I think we're the only people that have true basic research labs that are focused on the challenges of entertainment and creating entertainment. So there's really no limit to what I think we can do, and that's a benefit. The downside is all of that infrastructure can make us less responsive sometimes than I think we would like to be in terms of immediately jumping into and executing something. That's really all I can think of.
Good. Jerry, now it's your turn to make a career-terminating
Nothing
comment.
to say. I wish I was at both companies as well. I mean, I spent 5 years at Imagineering, so I miss the support structure we had for the creative group, for the creative teams. Disney had, it's a huge structure. It can slow you down, but at the same time, at Universal, it's a little lean, and it could be a little bit more, it could be a little larger and more supportive. I miss Marty Sklar, he was a great mentor for a lot of us, if not all of us, and I wish we had someone like Marty at Universal. And but in general, I think we're doing pretty well. So we're
I mean, there's no. I mean, you could ask the same thing about any project team, right? Or any single thing, right? I mean, we are all in the same industry. Obviously, we all know each other.
Our kids grow up together, go to the same schools.
Yeah.
I mean, we all are just the same people. As soon as you go home from the office, it's the same neighborhoods, it's the same restaurants, same churches, same schools. It's
Sometimes
the same
people from Disney and Universal go home to the same house. It
happens,
happens, right? And I think, you know, for the most part, we all are also fans of this form, of this art form, right? And the experiences that you guys all create and operate and manage, and which is, you know, I think the one thing that we, you know, I think we root each other on, you know, for making sure that we're elevating the form, and that, you know, the more, when anybody creates a great location-based experience, it helps all of us, right? So I think, I don't really feel that sense of real competition in that way.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for year 2017 legends, Joe Rohde, Thierry Coup, and Scott Trowbridge.